Good afternoon, everyone. I hope this finds you well on this sunny but cold Thursday afternoon. Thank you so much for joining this live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us. We've got some great questions in from you as always, and also some exciting announcements to make as well. So very much looking forward to sharing those with you. And it is also a prize week, a prize draw week for all your fantastic questions, as we do every month. We look back over the last month and we look at all the questions I managed to get around to answering that you've sent in, and then we pick one to give a prize to. So that's coming up as well. So lots to look forward to in this half hour. Thank you so much for joining us and taking a little bit of time on your Thursday afternoon to spend delving into the wonders of the ancient world. So we kick off with something that I wanted to thank you very much about. Hello, Linda, how are you doing? Which is on our Facebook page. We've been starting an album which is your shared photos. So photos you guys have been sending in to us. And it's been absolutely fantastic to see so many of those come in, particularly over the last week. So I wanted to take this time to thank you for sending in those photos, and also saying keep them coming. More and more photos, please. It would be absolutely fantastic to be able to share more of your photos, and that could be of visits to ancient sites, to places that you've been and places that you've loved, particular objects, artifacts, just something that's made you laugh to do with the ancient world, or indeed a photo of you sharing perhaps your Michael Scott calendar, 29 calendar, or a copy of a book that you're reading, kind of one of mine, or indeed anyone's in an ancient site or somewhere. Do share them with us and you can either send them direct to our Facebook page or send them via email to michaelscottacademic@gmail.com. And we're really enjoying seeing those photos, and I hope you are as well. Hello Debbie, hello Deborah, hello everyone. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you so much for joining in. So keep those photos coming. We'd love to see them, love to see where you're getting to and where you are in the world as well. I think that would be fab. One of the things that really kind of amazes me every time that we have this chance to talk together is where in the world people are sitting and thinking about the ancient world as we do together for this half hour. So do also send a photo or two of just where you are when you're listening to the Q&A, or where you're catching up or participating. Maybe the view out of your window, for instance, something like that. I suspect that would be absolutely fascinating to see the different views that people have around the world. Hello Willow, hello Debbie, how are you doing? So do please keep sending those in to the Your Shared Photos album. That's absolutely great. And we move on. Before we start your questions, I'm going to start with my big announcement for this week, which is that next week, of course, is Thursday the 14th of February, so is Valentine's Day. So we will be doing our Q&A as normal, but it will have a Valentine's theme. So please send in your questions for next week with anything to do with the aura of Valentine's Day, of love, affection, and your interest in those questions to do with the ancient world. And there's one question we've had in, which I'm going to hold over to next week, and it'll have to come with a sort of X rating to it as well. If any children are watching, anyone under the age of 18, they might have to look away, but we'll save that for next week. So next week, the 14th of February, is going to be a Valentine's Day themed Q&A. And the week after that, we are into the week of my professorial inaugural lecture, which is going to take place on Wednesday the 20th of February. Now, some of you have very kindly said that you will come to Warwick to participate in that lecture and be in the audience, and that's absolutely fantastic. We're looking forward to seeing you. But we also wanted to give the opportunity for people to participate and enjoy the lecture who aren't able to make it to Warwick. So we have agreed that we are going to broadcast the lecture as a Facebook Live video event on Wednesday the 20th of February. So what this means is that the Facebook Live, there'll be an event on the Facebook page that you can look at to secure the timings and see the link, but we're going to be kicking off just before around about 5:15 p.m. on Wednesday the 20th of February. So there'll have been some introductory remarks made by the different sort of senior members of Warwick University, but I'll be kicking off talking at about 5:15. I'll be talking for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then there is going to be a Q&A session. And this is where we think the Facebook Live could be really fun, because while you're watching the lecture that I give, you can, as you are doing now, send in your comments and questions, as you do for any normal Facebook Live. And we will have someone, the Warwick Classics Network Research Fellow, Dr. Paul Grigsby, will be watching the screen while I'm doing my talking and making a note of your questions. So when we then come to the Q&A at the end of the lecture, we'll be taking questions not only only from people who are in the room with us in Warwick, but also I'm going to be turning to Paul and asking him to pick one or two of your questions for him to then read out so that I can then answer them as well live. So you can not only watch the lecture, you can participate live as well and perhaps have your question answered. So hopefully that will be something that is attractive as an idea. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing your questions and making this professorial inaugural lecture not just a lecture for people in the room, people in the university, but really a lecture open to all and to everyone around the world, with everyone got an equal chance to participate and ask their questions. So I'm really excited about this idea. I hope you are too. So that's Wednesday the 20th of February, kicking off about 5:15 p.m. we'll go live, and it will last, with the lecture and the Q&A will last about 6:15 p.m. So oh, hang on a sec, have we got a problem with the connection? Oh God, hang on. Better, hopefully our connection has improved. Let us know if the connection has improved. We're trying to get rid of this fuzzy thing. We've got a slight problem with the Wi-Fi in this region. So we're now hopefully on 4G, and hopefully that connection is better. So thank you, Latifa, for letting me know that it was a bit fuzzy. Hopefully now you guys can all catch up and is all good. Bonjour, Michelle. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for coming in. So just to recap, next week, Thursday the 14th of February, is going to be... Oh no, still fuzzy. Hopefully it's getting better. Kind of fingers crossed. Next week, Thursday the 14th of February, we are doing a Valentine's theme Q&A as normal, 4 o'clock. Please send in your questions on Valentine's themes. And then when we go to Wednesday the 20th of February, we will be doing the live professorial inaugural lecture from 5:15 to 6:15, and you'll get a chance. Please ask your questions live as you do normally while I'm talking, giving my lecture. Paul will be noting them down, and then Paul will choose one or two when I turn to him asking questions. Think of it as soft focus, Judith. Thank you very much indeed. I'm so sorry. We'll try and improve this again. There might be a problem with the connection of where I'm sitting as well. So then you get a chance to ask your questions as well. And that week, on the 20th of February, there is not then going to be a Q&A on the Thursday the 21st as there would normally be. So we're going to take a holiday on that Thursday, but instead you've got the live professorial inaugural lecture to tune in and ask your questions on Wednesday the 20th. And then of course that video, if you can't join us between 5:15 to 6:15, that video will be shared on the Facebook page as well, so you can enjoy the lecture afterwards. That's the announcements from me. And again, just to recap as well, thank you so much for your fantastic photos that you're sending in to the shared photo album. We have a prize winner to announce as well. You've had some great questions that have been coming in through the month of February. I think it might be a record month for the number of questions we've managed to get through as well in our different Q&As. So that's extremely exciting. And we're just looking back over the month, incredible range. We've had questions coming in about what to do in certain parts of the world. We've had questions asking about Carthage, about Delphi, about amulets, about herbs and gardens, about women, about Greek tragedy, Roman garum fish paste, Pythagoras, Achilles and Hector, Cleopatra, audiobooks, how did Romans drink their wine and eat their dinner, and where else have we been? We've been to Acragas in Sicily, we've talked about recent classical discoveries, we've talked about Roman concrete, but for my money, the best question we've had in this month, and the winner of this month's prize draw, is Latifa Walker for her question about mental health and what can we understand and know about mental health in the ancient world, and how it was considered and how it was thought about and how people responded to treating it, that we thought about in last week's Q&A. So congratulations to Latifa Walker. That was absolutely fantastic and really insightful question. Much appreciated. And there is a prize for you of a book of Ancient Worlds, my Ancient Worlds book. So please let us know through the Facebook page or via email, michaelscottacademic@gmail.com, where to send that book to, and we'll get that on its way to you signed. Of course, let us know what kind of dedication you would like. We will do another prize draw at the end of next month, and the questions I'm answering today will of course be going into that prize draw as well. So we're going to kick off with one of those questions, which was from Tony Seifenkista. I hope I pronounced your surname correctly, Tony. And he was responding to an Instagram present. It's your birthday tomorrow, Latifa. Wow, what a great birthday present. I don't know if we'll be able to get it to you for tomorrow, but we'll certainly get it to you in the post very soon indeed. Thank you again for that fantastic question. Tony, Psychemphista, has asked, in response to an Instagram post I put out, which was a cartoon drawing of the Hannibal and his armies trying to cross the Alps and trying to take their elephants through the Alps. When he did that in 218 BCE, his famous move up from Spain with his armies across the Rhine first of all, and then across the Alps down into Italy to swooping down. The Roman sources record it like an eagle swooping out of nowhere suddenly to try and surprise the Romans and to make the most of that advantage of speed, when in fact some of the Roman troops had actually gone looking for him in Spain, and then when they realised he'd got there so fast into Italy, no one believed he could do it that quickly. They had to quickly turn around and come back. In the meantime, over the next 2 years, between 218 and 216 BCE, Hannibal was absolutely causing catastrophe after catastrophe for the Romans, leading up to the Battle of Cannae in 216, which was pretty much the biggest, most devastating defeat the Romans ever suffered in their history. And if you remember back to when we were talking in a previous Q&A about the Oracle of the Sibyl, the Sibylline books that the Romans, the last king of Rome, had bought and were kept sacred at the heart of Rome, and were consulted at moments of dire need and problem. After the Battle of Cannae, when Hannibal inflicted his major defeat on the Romans, that was one of those moments that the Book of the Sibyls were consulted. But Tony's question was about how do we know about these elephants crossing the Alps? And particularly, I mentioned in the Instagram post, and you can check that out at Prof Scott on Instagram, about us having found the faeces of those elephants. And yes, this is an absolutely fascinating fact. This is where science, archaeology, and history are all coming together. Hello, Maria. How are you doing? Science, archaeology, and history are all coming together. And this was an article published in 2016 in the Archaeometry journal. And it was a scientific project that was partly led by from York University in Toronto, partly from Queen's University in Belfast. And they had been examining some of the remains up in the different passes through the Alps. Now, it's always been a bit of a mystery as to where exactly the route was that Hannibal took to get through the Alps. And people for over 100 years have been trying to take the Roman sources that talk about it. We have nothing really from Hannibal himself telling us in any detail about his trip across the Alps. Everything we know about Hannibal and his army's escapades actually comes to us from the sources of his enemies, the Romans, trying to sort of look at all the fine details for how they describe the route and match that to a physical location in the Alps. And many people have focused on what's known as the Col de la Traversette in the Alps as the pass to get over the highest bit. Now we know he went into the snow line, and of course there needs to be a space enough to get not just elephants across, but an army through as well as an enormous baggage train of animals carrying all their gear and kit and food and supplies. Hello, Richard, how are you doing? Thanks so much for joining us. So they were focusing in on these different possible places, including Col de la Traversette, and they found a layer of ancient faeces, sort of decomposed matter, that when they tested it and they tested the microbes in it, were actually then able to date it as a result to around 200 BCE. So what they described it, I love the official descriptions of this, it was a mass animal deposition, is how they described it, the layer of faeces, how much that must have corresponded to in terms of actual animal crap that was put down. And with the sort of dating of this through the science, they said, look, when did that many animals pass through this place all within a short amount of time? Because actually up at those sorts of heights, there's very, very few animals that spend their time there for any length of time. A few sheep, a few goats, certainly not enough to create this mass animal deposition. And so the obvious answer in that sense, or the one that makes most sense, is the animal train going through not just of Hannibal's elephants, but also of all the pack animals that would be following through as well. Now they are still looking, I believe, to see if they could find the ancient remains of an elephant tapeworm in the faeces that would absolutely... Hello, Jane, how are you doing? No worries, thank you for joining us, thank you. We're talking about crap and faeces. Hannibal, the elephants of Hannibal as he marched across the Alps, and all the pack animals that came with them, they were crapping everywhere. And it's actually, we think, that we have found on the ground still in the Alps today that proves the route that Hannibal took through the Alps as Col de la Traversette. And if we find that elusive elephant tapeworm, then that will prove absolutely beyond doubt that elephants were marching through. And to be frank, there weren't many other people, in fact none that we know of, that tried to take elephants through the Alps by Hannibal around this period of time. So that's the kind of interesting evidence behind it. We'll put up a link on the Facebook page to the Archaeometry journal article if you want to go and read the science of it all, which I found absolutely fascinating. And that is how we're getting a better sense of the extraordinary achievements of Hannibal. I mean, obviously he lost many elephants on the way, and then he would lose actually his remaining elephants very soon after he was in Italy. But the way in which that journey, that feat is recounted, even in the Roman sources, really sets Hannibal out as an enemy, a worthy opponent, someone who really was able to do things that no one else could, and that had the Romans at his mercy for a period of time before the tide started to turn, that would eventually lead into a 2 BC2 back in Africa, Hannibal's final defeat against Scipio, the Roman general Scipio, at the Battle of Zama. It wasn't the end for Hannibal. He sort of popped off back to Carthage and then escaped from Carthage and ended up consulting over in the eastern Mediterranean with a number of the monarchs, the Hellenistic monarchs, who equally later tried to take on the might of Rome, and he was sort of whispering military strategy and advice into their ears, but eventually the Romans did catch up with him and put him in a position where the only honourable course for him, he felt, was suicide, and Hannibal eventually committed suicide. So there we are. Thank you so much, Tony Confisto, for that great question, bringing together the ancient stories and the realities, as Angela puts it. Absolutely, literature and archaeology tying together, and we can really put ourselves quite literally in the footsteps, although we might not want to be stepping in the stuff that's there, of the past. Hello, Anthony, how are you doing? Thank you so much indeed for joining us. We've also had a great question in from Isabel Aura this week. Did temples tend to be built on elevated ground or valleys to connect with higher spiritual energies in the ancient world? Well, this is a really interesting question, and it's not a area of research that has really taken off, in the sense that people in the 60s and 70s were quite interested in trying to work out whether there were natural landscapes that were particularly suited to particular gods. So in the Greek world, in relation to the Greek world, for instance, the great work by Vincent Scully in Temples, Earths and Gods, I think it was called, is trying to associate particular kinds of landscapes with particular gods. So Zeus, in his opinion, you would often find a sanctuary and architecture and temples, etc., to Zeus on high ground, high pinnacles of ground. Hello, Latifa, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. Kind of congratulations, and have a happy birthday for tomorrow. Congratulations again for winning the prize draw this month. So Zeus often has his sanctuaries on higher ground peaks, and that you can see as a tradition going all the way back to sort of Minoan, the Minoan world, where there were peak sanctuaries that often seemed to be dedicated to the high divinities, particularly to Zeus. But again, the moment you try and impose that rule, it's not always the case. Think about the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, the Olympic Games. That is on open, flat land, so is not on a high pinnacle at all. Principally because, of course, the Olympia and the Olympics need that open flat land to be able to stage all those games and competitions. So there was no hard and fast rule. And equally, there were lots of other considerations that always got factored into sort of where sanctuaries and temples got built. So it might be, for example, like in Olympia, like there were other things going on that had to take priority, but equally certain times and places there were particular stories that tied tied the god to a very particular spot in the landscape. It might be to a sacred tree, for instance. And as a result, the sanctuary would have to be based there, not really because that was a type of landscape that suited that god, but actually because the myth and the story told about them in that place tied them to that very specific spot. Or indeed, as we've seen of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, lots of people were trying to work out, even in the ancient world, why Delphi was where it was. The first story telling us is the sort of Homeric hymn to Apollo, and it talks about Apollo going on a sort of sightseeing trip to try and find the spot that was perfect for his oracular sanctuary and alighting on Delphi and liking it. But equally, by the time you get through to the great tragedians of the 5th century, they're saying, no, actually that's been an oracular sanctuary since the dawn of time and since the first mother goddess, and as a result it is a hand-me-down. It wasn't Apollo choosing a spot at all. This was a hand-me-down. And then of course there are the later Roman sources talking about Delphi being the spot where there was this crag that gases seemed to emerge, and that as a result is where the Pythian priestess had to be. So lots and lots of different reasons that go into telling us why sanctuaries are where they are, just as there are lots of different reasons why sanctuaries develop in different ways. There's no set model or plan for a sanctuary in the Greek world. And indeed, there's even no set model for how the ritual took place there. One of the things I find absolutely fascinating about Greek religion is that pretty much every great sanctuary you went to did things differently. So it might be in one sanctuary you had to sacrifice a particular animal. It would be a pig, or it'd be a ewe, or it'd be a goat or a sheep, or it had to be a black sheep, or it had to be an animal of a certain age, or it had to be an animal that was unblemished. And so you had to find out what you could sacrifice to the god, then when you could sacrifice it on particular days, particular times, how to do it in terms of kind of what bits you had to sacrifice and where to do that, and whether you had to ritually purify yourself first or not for a certain amount of time. And then each sanctuary also had its own kind of rules and regulations about when you could come into the sanctuary. There was a very important concept in the ancient Greek world of pollution, known as miasma in the ancient Greek. And every sanctuary decided on different rules as to when you were and were not polluted, and thus could not come into the sanctuary. So all of these things would have to be published in some form, often at the sanctuary gates, to let you know at that particular sanctuary, for that particular god, in that particular place, these were the rules. So there is a incredible diversity of experience in ancient Greek religion that made going to any new sanctuary quite a big endeavour, because ancient Greeks couldn't be sure that things would happen in the same way that they were used to at the sanctuaries they'd always been going to, perhaps down the road. So thank you, Isabel, for that great question. And whether temples are aligned to, for instance, the stars or the rising of the sun or the moon has also brought quite a lot of interest recently. People have tried to make several arguments about the Parthenon, for instance, being aligned with certain stars, but that requires us to work backwards to what in 2,500 BC were the star alignments and the particular places and the rising of the moons, etc. So it's a very complicated art to get right, and we haven't got it right yet, but I think it's an interesting avenue to continue thinking about. So thank you for those great questions. Quick chance to go for in the news. So from Egyptian mummies, we found more tombs found in Minya, dating back to the Ptolemaic era, so the era just after the death of Alexander the Great, when one of his generals, Ptolemy, takes over Egypt as his quarter of Alexander's empire and turns himself into the Ptolemaic ruler of Egypt. And the final Ptolemaic ruler will be, of course, Cleopatra. Now, they think they might have found her tomb as well, but here we found 50 mummies dating to that era, which is quite rare. So not to pharaonic Egypt of old, but actually to the kind of era of the last, if you like, sort of independent era for Egypt before it comes under the might of Rome. The mummies, 12 of which are children, absolutely extraordinary, were found in 4 burial chambers at the site of Tuna El Gabel in Minya, south of the capital Cairo. So that comes from the BBC News, and the link will be up on our Facebook page. This week, I'm going up this weekend to Lytham St Anne's Classical Association, the best branch of the Classical Association in the UK. No offence to any of the others, best because I know it the best. And also, so I was up there doing my presidential lecture a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going back up to judge their classics competition this weekend. So school children around the country have been submitting their entries for their 3 favourite objects and why. The finalists have been picked, and there are a fantastic group of finalists that I'm going up to judge on Saturday. So fingers crossed for all of them. Good luck to all of them. And I'm really looking forward to seeing their presentations and judging the winner. And then there's going to be also not just my choice, but there's also going to be a People's Award choice as well. So everyone who can get to AKS Lytham School to join us 2 p.m. this Saturday, please come along and you get a chance to vote as well. Then coming up in June, there's dismissal of the Grecian envoys at the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse at Globe Theatre in London. So this is about the Greeks demanding the return of Helen. The Trojans meet, and Paris wants to keep her. Antenor argues for a return. Priam will have to determine what to do. It's the Trojan War story kind of writ large, but thinking particularly about this moment when they choose not to give Helen back and thus occasion the war. So this was a play that was first put out, first performed in Polish and presented at a wedding in Warsaw in 1579. It sounds like quite an odd play to put on at a wedding, but it'll be interesting to see kind of how that goes. But that looks like a great fun thing to see at the Globe Theatre. And then if you are, again, something for the schools, Westminster School in London is the venue for a conference in GCSE Latin and also Greek, and there's an essay prize that's being supported by the Classical Association, the national branch, the national organisation. That is next Thursday on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, from the morning through to 1 o'clock. It's a conference for pupils in years 10 and 11 looking at the Latin and Greek set text. So if you are out there studying GCSE Latin or Greek, do mark this out to your teacher, and we'll put on some links on the Facebook page. So there we go. There's lots of fun things happening around, and we've got time. Oh yes, we've got time for one more question. Hello, Red Ripper, how are you doing? Were there any rules in the ancient world preventing women entering temples when they were on? I can't see the question. Hang on. When they're on the periods like modern India? Yes, and so there were a number of rules depending on the temple that you went to and the sanctuary that you went to. Again, these things could vary hugely. But there were rules surrounding how long you were considered to be polluted for after you'd had sex. So that's both for men and for women. So certain sanctuaries, it was you couldn't enter for 24 hours after sex, certain sanctuaries 3 days after sex, certain sanctuaries 9 days. Also for women menstruating, there were kind of rules again about how long during the period or whether there was a period of time after the finishing of the cycle that you couldn't enter a sanctuary. Equally after childbirth, there was a certain amount of time after childbirth that women were considered still to be polluted and so couldn't enter a sanctuary, depending on the sanctuary you went to. And equally also after death. So when women who were particularly important in the cleaning of the body of the dead person within the home before the first stage of the funerary ritual, which is when the body was laid out, the kind of faeces, as it were, after being involved in that process, having touched the dead body, you were considered to be polluted for a certain amount of time and thus couldn't then go into a sanctuary. But how long that lasted for changed completely depending on which sanctuary you were going to, where you were in the Greek world. So there really was huge variety relating to all of these issues. Have we got time? Yes, we can quickly get into. Deborah Anderson has asked, if you could visit any ancient site during its heyday, where would you go? Ooh, great question. And please let me know what you think about this. If you could visit any ancient site during its heyday, where would you go? Well, as you know, we're doing an ancient global history module with our undergraduates I'm leading at Warwick at the moment, and we're having great fun at the moment with the students doing their presentations about different parts of the ancient global connected world that particularly interest them. So we've really been thinking about this particular question really in earnest over the last couple of weeks, and we've been everywhere. We've been to Japan, we've been in Ethiopia, we've been in China, we've been in India, we've been and I wanted to bring people back to thinking about the sort of Roman Parthian border. Pompeii, says Charlotte, of course, Pompeii, a classic, but Palmyra, for me, would be an absolutely amazing place to be in during its heyday. So from the kind of late 1st century AD, particularly in the 2nd century AD, through to the 160s, and then again, to a certain extent, end of the 190s through into the early 3rd century, Palmyra was an absolutely pulsating caravan trading city that was ruling the way in which trade was making its way from Palmyra across the desert through to the Euphrates, down the Euphrates, and then out in to the Indian Ocean and on its way to India, and then on its way back, guarding those caravans of trade coming back up through the desert to Palmyra and then off into the Roman world. And it was an absolute cosmopolitan melting pot of people. We know from the graves in Palmyra that we found fragments of Chinese silk with Chinese patterns, but that we know also the extraordinary architecture of the site. Some of it a little bit less standing now after the devastation caused by IS there in recent times, but also, of course, in the ancient world. Palmyra was destroyed by the Romans in the late 3rd century when Palmyra got a bit too big for its boots and turned against Rome. Kind of Actaeon's pioneering city for Linda. Rajrupa will go to Taxilogiana Nalanda. Yeah, Nalanda, the university, absolutely fantastic idea indeed. Delphi says, Alison, excellent, good choice. But yeah, I would love to be at Palmyra in the max time when it was really at the heart of this global trading network with materials and people coming from all over. Would have been an extraordinary experience. But I think other points on that global network would have been fantastic too. I'm thinking of the Indian trading ports that we know the Romans went to on an annual basis, whether that be Barigaza or Muziris or Pondicherry on the west and east coast of India, where people were coming down from Central Asia, the Kushans for instance, and trading goods, as well as goods coming all the way from China, and Romans turning up, as well as Arabian fleets turning up to trade. What cosmopolitan melting pots these places would have been. Absolutely wonderful and extraordinary to experience, and would have given us a completely different impression of the ancient world than I think we get too often from studying just the Greek and Roman material. Our time is up. Good afternoon, Sheila. Thank you so much for joining in just as we come to an end. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry once again about a few fuzzy effects early on. Just a reminder, next week, Valentine's Day, send in your themed questions for Valentine's Day Q&A, and the week after that, my professorial inaugural lecture on Wednesday, the 20th of February, 5:15 to 6:15 p.m. Tune in live to be able to ask your questions over Facebook Live and have a chance for those questions to be asked out loud in the room as part of the Q&A following my lecture, and really be part of this fantastic experience. It's a great privilege for me to give that lecture. It's unusual for Warwick University to do professorial inaugural lectures, so it's a great opportunity and an event for the university, and we're really looking forward to having you as part of it. So thanks everyone. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.